Yo, welcome back, everybody, to another edition of the Orangebloods Texas Football Channel. I'm Geoff Ketchum. It's Modcast time, which means I'm joined by Anwar, Jason, Alex. We're talking Texas football for about the next hour or so. Do us a favor. If we say something relatively charming or funny or insightful, like the video, subscribe to the page, ring that bell so that you get all of the notifications. And if you like it, if you dislike it, leave some comments in the comments section. I can't promise that we'll read every comment, but we might. And given the kind of week that we've had on the 40 acres, maybe it's an opportunity to just let some vent and some frustration out. That's what we're here for. Fellas, it's been quite an interesting week. And I guess, Anwar, I'll come to you first. I think we knew last week when we were talking about the Baylor-Texas game that Texas loses that game and falls to 4-4, that it would be a very curious point in the season. How, with Iowa State looming, does this thing stay on the rails? Can they pick up momentum and end this season in a way that you can still attach some positivity towards it? And we've seen player in the portal. We've had the Joshua Moore incident yesterday where even though he's still on the team, there's a confrontation between him and Steve Sarkisian. There's just a constant state of question asking now about where things stand. Where do you think things stand?
Well, it's been one of those weeks, Ketch, where we start off with MonkeyGate to start off the week. We have the Joshua Morris thing. They've just got the Iowa State game that's going on. You know, some of this, Catch, is just seemingly a byproduct of 4-4, people frustrated. I mean, I don't know if even the Banks thing is a major story, if this team is 6-1 or undefeated or, anything to that effect. It just seems to be that now that we're in this state, I think everyone's kind of annoyed about everything. And so, I think Sarkeesian, and by the way, we'll get, if we need to get into the Banks thing, I mean, I don't know what exactly he did wrong.
It feels like 3 weeks ago, Anwar. Like this week has been filled with so many things that the Banks thing feels, I don't know. It doesn't feel like it's not even on my brain.
A viral story, which was crazy. I mean, but that was like international story that blew up. Catch, I just think that this week for me, Catch, is Sarkeesian really probably being tested in challenges in ways he hasn't been as a head coach, because you've got players who are frustrated with things that are going on, the losing that has happened. They're got to go on the road versus Iowa State. If they lose that game, Catch, they've got to win 2 out of the next 3 just to become bowl eligible. And who knows what's going to happen there. So I think it's a challenge. Like, I think it's a huge challenge for Sarkeesian to really prevent this thing from going off the rails. Now, some may say it's already gone off the rails, Catch. And maybe that's a conversation or a debate that could be had. But to make sure this thing doesn't go south in ways that we've seen it go south before, especially like in the Charlie Strong years, that to me is Sarkeesian's biggest challenge this week, is to rally the troops to make sure this does not become something that it would be a very forgettable first season.
Alex, it's weird. The old adage is you are what your record says you are. So this is a 4-4 team that is 0-4 and the 4 toughest games on the schedule that they played so far. And yet it's also a team that would be 7-1 if games were only 45 minutes long instead of 60. So this is a team that's been good enough to lead ranked teams by double digits, 2 of which were away from home in the last 3 weeks into the second half. And yet they're not closing these games out, and it's leading. When you look at this team, do you see 4-4? Like, what is it in your brain when you're watching this group play and you're reviewing all of the snaps? What do you find yourself thinking about this team 8 games in?
They look like a 4-4 team at times. When they're at their worst, they look like a 4-4 team. I feel like there are times when they look like a 6-2 team. It's like, it's a tale of 2 halves. It's really a tale of 3 quarters versus 1 quarter, as you just kind of alluded to. It's just in the fourth quarter, it's been bad. I've been racking my brain just trying to figure out what it is. Is it, defensively, we have seen it rear its head, with just specific examples of things specific examples I keep thinking of would be, of course, the run, just the run fits on defense, not only along the defensive line, but with Luke Brockermeyer, when that guy's running sideline to sideline and he's running laterally, he can't get off blocks. It was kind of interesting that in the last series of this last game versus Baylor, they didn't have Brockermeyer in there. They had Jalen Ford. Maybe they're starting to sort of realize that too. We've talked about it here on the show before about how that guy gets gassed and, laterally, he can't get off blocks. It happened versus Oklahoma. It happened again versus Oklahoma State. It did not happen in that last possession of Baylor's this last week, thanks to Jalen Ford. And then, I think the other thing that could keep this, that could make this team look more like a 6-2 team than a 4-4 team. I wrote about it in my column today. I think they need to move Junior Angelau back over to right guard. I think that if Steve Sarkisian is a coach who wants to build strength on strength, the way he talks about in these press conferences, get your two best offensive linemen next to one another. Don't spread this thing, apart. Get Angelau back next to Kerstetter. So when things get hard down the stretch in these games, no matter what it is with the offensive line, run behind those two guys the same way that you did to start the season, whenever the run game did not peter out in the second half. So I talked about it in my column on what, I don't even know which one it was, but in one of my columns this week, I said, if Texas wins out at this point and goes 8-4 in the regular season, and then ends up winning a bowl game in some sort of impressive fashion, or even in a non-impressive fashion, just gets a bowl win, right? After reeling off 4 straight to end the season. Don't you guys think that people will be thinking about that team in a way that's diametrically opposed to the way that they are right now?
Yes, but that's a lot of ifs. I mean, they could lose 3 of the next 4 just as easily as they could win out. But this team is, it's so frustrating. You just can't wrap your head around it. I mean, I think I said it maybe in this modcast last week. This team at times looks like the best team in the Big 12. And then they just find a way to play badly enough in the fourth quarter to lose games. So do I view this as a 4-4 team? I mean, the record is what it says it is, but I think it's better than a 4-4 team, but you just never know, man. I mean, I think they've played better overall than a 4-4 season would seem to indicate, but they just, like I said, they seem to play just badly enough to lose nail biters in the end. And with all the turmoil and hoopla and distractions going on this week, wouldn't it be just like Texas to have their best week and go out and play their best game against Iowa State with all the distractions going on? Maybe that's what this team needed, was a bunch of distractions to kind of take its focus off some of the stuff that's going on the field. Maybe they'll go out this week and play a really good game against a good Iowa State team, but who the hell knows with this team?
Well, what they don't need is to get a double-digit lead in the second half. Is probably that seems to be a huge Achilles heel. So if they can do anything in the second half, it's
start slowly, Texas. Yeah, start slowly. Yes.
But see, that's not good either from a historical perspective. If what Sark has been able to do in these games, that he hasn't taken the lead into this
lose scenario, I guess. Literally, yes.
It's interesting, Jason. Anwar, Alex, you guys jump in too. I don't remember this specific. I mean, we knew a year ago Texas wasn't winning all of its close games, right? I mean, when the justification for firing Tom Herman was made, you look back at games last year that I think Texas fans felt like they probably should have won, and they didn't. So it was like, let's bring in somebody who can elevate game management and the offense and maybe help get Texas over the hump. I can't ever remember a scenario, and maybe I'm just blocking it out, where we've said the worst thing that can happen is the team leads by 14 points, late third quarter. It's weird that this fourth quarter thing has really they've been outscored 55-10 in the last 3 games in the fourth quarter. I can't ever remember a team where this problem existed. And I think that's part of the deal that Sarkeesian and his staff and the players, they're trying to figure out what to tweak, what to make better, what to psychologically do. Last week we were talking about them watching Free Willy, Free Solo, yes, one of the Free movies. And it's not, this isn't common. And so they find themselves, I think, in an uncommon place trying to fix something that they probably in Sarkeesian's career, this exact thing has probably never existed before. It feels like it's made the program feel a little lost. They're searching for the answer. Isn't the answer just play better? I mean, I don't know. It feels like they're re-examining everything, and it's made for a situation that it feels almost like a rhetorical question.
Yeah, I don't think there's a magic button you can push, a magic pill you can take to turn this cycle. I think as silly as it sounds, as simple as it sounds, play better. I mean, listen, man, a lot of it's luck too. They've just got to have the ball bounce their way a couple of times. And it's a vicious cycle. I think once you get caught up, just like winning is contagious. I mean, losing games is contagious. And this team this year, I mean, honestly, to some degree, this program has taken on a losing mentality, it seems like. They just need, I said it last week, the best thing that could happen for Texas is to maybe be trailing Iowa State 14-10 at half, and then they come back and win this game this week. I think they just got to find a way to break the cycle. I mean, I was talking to some people about this yesterday. I said, you can talk about, is it mental? Yes, I think there's some mental. Is it strength and conditioning? Maybe it is. Is it Texas being too conservative after they get on the lead? Maybe there's been some of that. I also think it's just a lot of bad luck. One play, some of these games or these plays are just a matter of inches. Oklahoma throws 2 bombs downfield. One of them is basically a Hail Mary that they complete. If that doesn't happen, Texas probably wins that game. If Joshua Moore doesn't basically gift 10 points himself to Baylor, Texas wins that game. If he holds on to a ball, if he doesn't fumble here or there, if he makes a catch in the end zone, it's a game of inches. And those
pick 6 against Oklahoma State. If that play doesn't happen, Texas may run away with that game.
Absolutely. They were taking control early. Looked like that game was all but over, except for that one play, turned the whole thing around. I say it's a game of inches, but all these close plays seem to be going against Texas. And I don't know if that's bad luck, if it's just mental, they're not confident. I don't know what it is, but they just need to find a way to gain some confidence by maybe having a little luck. I think once that happens, they'll be fine and they can move past this. But for it to happen 3 weeks in a row is, as you said, Ketch, you and I have been covering this program a long time. I don't remember ever seeing anything like that.
Anwar, it's interesting, even talking with Serenity this week about our Orangebloods sponsored player interviews, all of those guys have kind of had the same response, which is they're focused on getting out of this losing streak, and that they're frustrated, and that the focus is on just getting out of this thing. It's clear that there's a bit of a frustrated locker room. I'm sure everybody, you don't lose 3 games in a row at this school and not, the month of October is one to forget. The month of November now becomes a real critical piece of the Sarkeesian story, because there's probably no way to save this season so that you come out of it talking about championships and all of the things that they would have hoped to have had as part of the narrative. Mm-hmm. They've got to throw this thing the other direction, because I'm seeing Jason report on Kelvin Banks and Cam Dewberry and Devin Campbell and Evan Stewart. There's still, Sarkeesian even referenced it in the press conference on Monday, like, hey, we could have 5 offensive line commits, but we need a certain kind of offensive line commit. It's hard pressed for me to think that they would get those guys if this ends up being a 6-6 kind of a season. But if Texas isn't careful and they don't figure this thing out, it's kind of what they're headed for, that kind of season. And then the next 9 months begin, and it's a bit of a conversation about the program that you can't completely control if you're Sarkeesian, if the results on the field aren't good.
Yeah, the thing is, like I said, I've heard what Jason said, but the numbers really show that this team has not played well this season. So yeah, as I looked it up, you guys talking nationally from a national rank, this defense is ranked 106th in the country. From a rushing defense standpoint, they're ranked 118th in the country.
Out of how many is it?
130.
Yeah.
So 118 out of 130 is where this rushing defense is ranked nationally. They're ranked 69th in sacks allowed. They're tied for last in the Big 12, which would somewhat be obvious, right? So there's a lot of holes that need to be fixed. That Catch, I've said this, repeatedly. At this point in the season, you are who you are. Like you don't you said it before. I think Jason may have said, or Alex, I can forget, say you can't flip a magical switch at this point. You are 3/4 through the season, right? It's only 4 more games left. Like, you can't say about all these other type of things. Like, right now, the numbers show who they are. The numbers reflect who they are. They can try to figure out, and I'm sure there's a lot of frustration. That's what led to some of the things that happened this week. Is a lot of it is frustration. You're losing. Of course you're going to be frustrated. No one's going to be happy about that. It's not going to be a kumbaya. It's not time to, sing and talk about all the positives. Like, no one expected 4-4. Give me the person who says this team is going to be 4-4 before the season that really, really meant it. And it wasn't someone that was just hating. I'm talking about the person that really meant it and analyzed it. Nobody was predicting that this might be a 7-5 team, 6-6 kind of team. No one's predicting that this team would be potentially going to the Texas Bowl again, right? But here we are, Catch. We start off where we have to start, okay, what can we settle for? So you start off the season, and then everything's about, hey, look at the rankings, and could slip into the CFP, all those type of things, and a loss happens in a non-conference game, and it's like, all right, well, all our goals are still ahead of us, and so it's about trying to get to the Big 12 championship and trying to get to the Big 12 championship. And then what happens? A Big 12 loss happens. Like, okay, all our goals are still ahead of us. We can still be the number 2 team, maybe still get tied for first. Another Big 12 loss happens. Like, all right, we can still get there as a runner-up. And then all of a sudden something else happens. And now you're like, well, here we are at the Texas Bowl. People are going to be frustrated, about that. And that's why I go back to originally, Catch. It's really about Sarkeesian for me, finding a way to make sure, like I said, I'm going back to where I will have a hanging lead, make sure this thing doesn't go off the rails, because you do have, I'm sure these coaches are frustrated too, Catch. I mean, they didn't come here where, they just won a natty. At Alabama, and they're really now got to talk about, man, we got to get bowl eligible. Like, I'm sure that they're sitting there thinking, what the hell is this? What the hell we found ourselves into? You can start talking about recruiting and bringing guys in, but there's frustration levels on all from all players to coaches to fans to media members. I mean, everyone's a little bit frustrated at this point. Just up to Sarkeesian to fix it.
I'm sure that Banks and his girlfriend have had that monkey for years. And they come to Austin, yes. The damn thing becomes a story. Like, that is weirdly part of the thing that happens when you don't win. It's like that quote in Major League when, Crash Davis is telling Nuke LaLoosh, you win 20 games in the majors, and they'll say, you've got a personality. But if you don't win 20 games and you do the same stuff, you're a bum. And there's a little bit of that. If Texas is 6-2 and 7-1, I really feel, you know what I mean? And everything's still in front of them. I think the entire, the margins that have defined this season have created really difficult discussions. Because what do we think? Just real quick, I'm curious, and Alex, I'll come to you first, and we'll just Alex, Jason, Anwar, back to back to back. At this very moment, you think Texas finishes with what record in the regular season?
I'd like to think 8-4, but I think it'll be 7-5.
Jason?
I was inclined to go 7-5, but I'm not sure, man. West Virginia and Kansas State, I think they maybe probably split one of those. I'm going 6-6.
Anwar?
Same, 6-6.
I think I'm with Alex at 7-5, but I'm acknowledging that I feel like I'm taking a big leap to do that, right? Because that would require, in my mind, I don't think they're
West
winning
Virginia
this
game away.
Yeah.
Between West Virginia is, but Kansas State's at home.
Yeah, the two Kansas schools play in Austin, and Texas is at West Virginia in the middle of those two.
That's that's a road game too, where it's not. I mean, it'd probably be an early morning one, right? I'm sure, but still, it's like that's a weird one, right? Anwar, you got to fly into some way different airport and then travel. Like this team, yeah, I can see that.
It's November. It's cold. They don't have much to play for. If you some seniors are just thinking about let's just get this thing over with. I'm kind of that's where I think if you say just if all things are equal, first game of the season is one thing. This late in the season, from a psyche standpoint, and look how much has Sarkeesian talked about psyche? He's talked about psyche to enough that he says he doesn't want to talk about psyche anymore, right? Ketch, you pointed that out, and Alex, you had that in your observations. Like I don't want to keep talking about it when you spent an entire week talking about psyche and free solo. So, yeah, from a psyche standpoint, I just don't know where they're going to be a couple of weeks from now when the West Virginia game rolls around.
It really is an interesting deal when you think that Texas was kind of in this position last year. We get to November and they lost enough games that the Iowa State game ends up being the killer last year, right? But the thought was, how would this season end? And then they closed pretty strongly. They beat they beat Kansas State into the ground. They win the bowl game. And at least the way the season ended, there was an uptick. They'll have to do it again because I think, Anwar, you hit the main thing that I think is most concerning. And I think it's one of the things about this week that's a bit of an eyebrow raiser, right? They lose that third game in a row, and fate determines that this is the week that the monkey thing happens. Didn't happen in week one, where maybe it's not a big deal, but it happens this week and they're losing. And then the Joshua Moore incident happens. And
don't forget people got on Orangebloods and had the video of Banks like out partying or whatever after the Baylor loss, right? And people were a little upset about that as well.
And players are being pretty honest and look, we're frustrated and we just want this losing streak to end. And you're not playing for the same goals anymore because Sarkeesian says that we don't talk to the players about it, but they know. And the players now know 4 games to go. You're not really playing for anything now other than to salvage something.
Get those seniors to a bowl game. How many times have we heard, let's get those seniors to a bowl game? Like, if we never have to hear that again. But
I don't think the seniors want to hear that. You know what I mean?
They don't want to go to the Texas Bowl.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, those seniors don't want to go to the damn Texas Bowl. They've been there, done that. These seniors don't want to go there.
Well, so Jason, the question becomes, because I was doing I was doing a video with Ari yesterday. We were talking about how do you grade Steve Sarkisian in year one, and I go, well, one of the things that he had to do, the expectations were that they would have a top 5 recruiting class. That expectations were high with his pedigree as a recruiter and the staff that he hired and the talent level in the state of Texas this year. That it would end up with a nationally elite class. They're still in a position to do that. That dream hasn't died, no matter how pessimistic anybody wants to get. They're not going to get those guys. But those guys are like still actively looking at Texas. They haven't closed the door yet. I feel like we're moving the goalposts on this. So I want to acknowledge it because I feel like every video that we did before the season started, we kind of all agreed this team kind of needs to go 9-3 at a minimum to really shoot the recruiting momentum into the stratosphere. That's not going to happen. But this recruiting thing hasn't died the way I thought it might have. Like guys just shutting the door on Texas. Does it even matter what they do on the field now? In your mind, do they need to close as strong as possible to get these guys?
I think so. I think you can sell 8-4, 4-game winning streak.
9-4 with the bowl win.
Well, go to a bowl game, obviously, if you win that. A lot of these guys will decide before the bowl game, but not all of them, Alex. Some are going to wait till January. So, I think it certainly matters. You can sell 8-4 in momentum. I mean, listen, there's a listen for the tally. But 3 months ago, Texas was selling to these recruits, hey, we're going to get this thing turned around. We're going to be a championship contender. Come be part of this. Now it's, hey, you can come in and start early. The sales pitch has had to pivot a little bit, but the guys are still listening and it's still resonating. Sark mentioned it on Monday regarding offensive line. You never sell offensive linemen, hey, you can play early. That's just, in a perfect world, the theory is you want offensive linemen to play their third year on campus, right, Ketch? That's what we've always heard. Well, now Texas is telling them, take a look, man. You can play early, maybe even start as a freshman. Not ideal. You don't want to be in that position, but it's true. And, Devon Campbell, Kelvin Banks, Ernest Green, those guys look at that depth chart and they say, gosh, maybe I can play early. Evan Stewart, you can say, look what Xavier Worthy's doing. Hey, yeah, we've got Brendan Thompson, but we need more of that. We need to package you guys on the field together. So the sales pitch has gone from come compete for championships right away to come in and play early. But at some point, you can do that with success, but you can't go 5-7 and sell that, okay? You can mix that sales point in with 8-4, maybe even 7-5. But yeah, I do think these next 4 games matter from a recruiting perspective. And if Texas goes 4-0, I still think 8-4 is a pretty easy sell for this staff with the remaining targets on their recruiting board. 6-6 or 5-7, it's going to be a really tough sell with those elite players.
Whenever you get to that level, it feels more like a team that's tanking as opposed to a team that's engaged in a productive struggle. Like, right? Like if you're 8-4 and you're still able to pitch this stuff about integrating in new players, and
you can say, hey, we're close, we're a step away, right?
Yeah, what you can say is not only do you get early playing time, but also, hey, you can come. Like, you're not just coming in to play; you're going to come in and play immediately to help put us over the top. I think those two pieces in the recruiting puzzle are the two that go together really, really well, or that at least, certainly send a stronger message than just saying, like, look how bad we are. Like, you're going to come right in and play, right?
But if you're 6-6, you can't as easily sell, hey, man, you are the missing piece.
Exactly.
We're
Yes,
one
you can.
step away.
Yes, you can.
If you're Vince Young, maybe.
If you look, Charlie did that after year 1. Charlie sold all that stuff to Malik and all those guys that he had. And it was year 2. Charlie just threw out a bunch of freshmen, and that's what he threw out there.
Malik kind of fell into UT's lap. He was probably going to A&M if they had a defensive coordinator hired.
We can't do that. We can't do revisionist
yeah,
history.
can.
No, that's what happened though.
I understand what
like
happened. It still
Charlie
happened.
was the Michael Scott of recruiting. Things just kind of worked out for him. So.
But you can't ignore that. I'm just saying, to your point, when you guys are saying like it has to be 8-4 or it's going to be really difficult. I'm just saying, I'm just using it as the show that, hey, you can maybe not have all the success that you want and still be able to get in an elite class and still sell it to guys. That's all I'm saying.
What I think the tougher thing is though, Anwar, and this goes to, this is what Texas has chosen, who they want to be. They're having to, like, Charlie wasn't competing with a Texas A&M in 2015 that was as nationally relevant right now as this Texas A&M program under Jimbo Fisher has been. And then, the schools that Texas has to beat out, with the exception of Kelvin Banks, and even Oregon is in a playoff conversation right now, but when you're trying to beat Ohio State and you're trying to beat Alabama and you're trying to beat Georgia and you're trying to beat Clemson and A&M and Oklahoma for prospects, Texas is choosing to try to buy property on Park Avenue. And they're doing it without a portfolio that matches the schools that they're competing against. And I think that's one of the big differences in 2022's recruiting versus 2015. Is that when Charlie showed up, it wasn't, the state of Texas hadn't quite been infiltrated and taken over by this new big dog class that emerges. Clemson had no real presence in Texas at all. Alabama, other than Ashawn Robinson, really hadn't been beating Texas consistently for kids in Texas. The Ohio State thing was just starting to happen when you think about J.K. Dobbins and who that offensive lineman from Fort Worth that went there like in 2016, I think.
Yeah.
It just
Catch. Can you do me a favor before you go too far down your rabbit hole? Before you go too far, can you pull up the 2015 class and can you give me some revisionist history here?
I mean, I can tell you where the top 10 guys went.
I mean, because I feel like as I followed the recruiting in 2015, you had guys who had offers from other places.
They all had offers. Those schools just.
And how many of those guys did they flip?
Presence.
How many guys did they flip as well?
Well, I'm pulling up the 2015 LSR right now just to be able to have the data in front of me. So.
And I'll let you talk. The only reason I'm bringing it up is that I just feel like maybe even if they're not at 8-4, even if they finish at a 7-5, 6-6, there's still some potential to have success in recruiting. That's all. That's the only reason I'm bringing that up.
Look, these are the schools. So in 2015, you had Malik go to Texas. Dalen Mack went to A&M. DeMarcus Lodge went to Mississippi. Mayatau Huma, or however you say his name, he wasn't good enough for me to remember his name. He goes to LSU. Holton Hill, Texas. Soso Jamabo goes to UCLA. Ronald Jones goes to USC. Chris Boyd, Texas. Kyler Murray, A&M. Baylor got Jarrett Stidham. Carlos Strickland went to Cal. I mean, other than Deontay Thompson going to Alabama, there's no Oklahoma. There's no Ohio State. Alabama got one kid. There's no Clemson. And then you fast forward this year in California and UCLA and USC and Mississippi, those aren't the schools that Texas has to beat out to get kids. And this 7 years later, it's a much different elite first class group of schools that have set up shop in Texas. And look, maybe Anwar, maybe you're right. Maybe that same sales pitch in year one can work. You probably can't do that every year, sell the same, come in here, because the fan base will get you fired if you can't play well enough eventually that it all falls apart on you. But Charlie did do it. Charlie, in his own unique way, that first year, Jefferson, Holton Hill, Chris Boyd, Anthony Wheeler.
And you remember, Cash, he had us holding our breath until the very last minute. We weren't sure that thing was going to pull through, and it's like he pulled a rabbit out of a hat.
Charles Omenihu and Connor Williams, those all end up being NFL players.
Yeah. I mean, the irony is everybody likes to think that the highly ranked kids are Texas just isn't signing enough Malik Jeffersons and Holton Hills and Chris Boyds. Those guys had talent and played well enough to get to the league, but none of those guys ever became A-list college players. That's another weird thing. Caden Stearns is another example of that. Even when Texas hits on highly ranked guys, they're not quite emerging.
What about Adrian Phillips? I've thought about him too. Like, what about that guy? Like, they're definitely guys in the league you look at and you're just like, man, they're better in the league than they were at Texas. It's crazy.
Well, that happens way too much. I mean, it feels like Texas gets more guys undrafted into the league these days than they get drafted and they stick around. I mean, Texas has had undrafted guys stick in the league for going back as far as I can remember. I mean, Priest Holmes was an undrafted guy, and Lyle Sinline off that national championship team ends up starting on a Super Bowl team at Arizona. And, I mean, you got to have a roster full of some guys like that, but you need higher end talent. That's where this current program, it really lacks. It just, other than the offensive wow guys.
To that point, I mean, Omenihu and Connor Williams, neither one of them had offers from A&M, Oklahoma, Alabama. I mean, Texas is recruiting against a whole different animal right now. The recruiting landscape in the state of Texas is as tough as it's ever been in 20 plus years of me following this. Just, Ketch mentioned all the schools that now recruit the state so heavily.
But Jason, you give last thing I'll say on it. They also went out of state to get guys. And so that has to speak to being and how they panned out. We're just talking about what they were in high school, right?
Yeah.
They still went out, as I look at here, they still went out of state and they got Kirk Johnson, who Alex loved for years.
The Texas coaches love that.
He still does. Why isn't Kirk Johnson playing more snaps?
There was Devontae Davis, Devonair Clarington, John Burt coming out of Tallahassee.
Yeah, John Burt wanted to go to Auburn. Auburn wouldn't take him. He wound up at Texas. Clarington had it. Listen, none of these guys were super heavily recruited, even these out-of-state guys. I mean, they were what I would consider high 3-star talents in the state of Texas, the equivalent. Again, I mean, you didn't have Alabama in those guys coming after John Burt, he wanted to go to Auburn. He decommitted from Texas, tried to flip to Auburn. They wouldn't take him, which is a little story that really never was discussed that publicly, but Auburn wouldn't take him. So he wound up recommitting to Texas. You can, Malik Jefferson is Malik Jefferson, but, we mentioned Connor Williams, Amenahue, those guys exceeded expectations. You're going to find those guys. I mean, any good coaching staff is going to have good evaluations, but you can't truly compete at the level Texas wants to and needs to compete at unless you're signing consistently, top 5, in the worst years, top 10 classes. What did this class rank? 12th with 29 players in it. You have to be able to sign those top 10 guys in the state consistently. And it's harder to sign those guys now than it was 7 years ago. That's not to say that Sark and his staff can't sign some, high 3-star guys that aren't going to, like, whoa, that guy's turned out to be much better than his ranking indicated. But that's not a consistent recipe for success. You've got to hit on the Devon Campbells. You've got to hit on the Cam Dewberrys. You've got to hit on the Evan Stewarts and Kelvin Banks. If you get 4 of those, maybe 2 of them pan out and are really good players. But if you get 4 Connor Williams, you're probably lucky if one of them turns out to be that plus type player. That's what hell, Kirby Smart said it last week. He said their defense isn't so great because they're just that good at coaches. He said we just got better talent than everybody. Now, how they got that talent?
Anwar, you know what happened in Charlie's? So the 2017 class is the shit stain class. Remember? Mm-hmm. That's the one that Charlie signed, and Kerstetter and Ellinger.
Yes. It was Ellinger who called it that. Ketch didn't make up that name.
I did not make that up. That's a player coined.
Yeah.
I heard Kerstetter say it for the first time, but maybe it was Ellinger.
Maybe Ellinger was the first.
So, but you had that 2017 class, which was Charlie's last year. And remember, by the end of it, they weren't even trying. I mean, they knew they were fired. The players, it was just dead in the water. They bring Herman in. Listen to where I'm not going to even name the players. I'm just going to name the schools that the top 10 guys in the 2017 class went to, because this is when A&M was in the middle of their Sumlin to Fisher. A&M was in a bad way too. So listen to the top 10 guys in 2017: Stanford, Ohio State, Florida State, Louisiana State, Oklahoma, Notre Dame, Alabama, Ohio State, LSU.
Wow.
Top 10 players.
Players stayed in state. Wow.
Not a single one. And
what was the highest ranked player that stayed in state? 11?
Sam Ellinger was 11 for me.
And you had him ranked higher than most.
Yeah, I did. So that was the year that in recruiting, suddenly Ohio State's getting 3 guys out of the top 10. They signed Baron Browning, Jeff Okudah, and J.K. Dobbins.
All in the NFL.
All those guys hit. Jeff Okudah hasn't turned into a great pro, but he's hurt now. But
whatever
he had an awful rookie season, but top 5 pick in the draft. Baron Browning, was a multi-year starter, and J.K. Dobbins, one of the best running backs they've ever had. That class was Walker Little, and Marvin Wilson, Kaylavon Chason, CeeDee Lamb. Like, that ends up being a historically good year, and nobody stayed in state. And from that moment on, really Ohio State and Alabama were like, oh, we can cherry pick in Texas. And it never has really changed. I think A&M has flipped the script a little bit for them. It does feel like Texas is still trying to reclaim that 2019 class. Texas had to go all out of state. Remember, that was the year where Herman pulled it together and ends up having a top 5 class.
Is that the Jake Smith class and the Brew McCoy year and all that? Okay,
yep. Yeah. It was where I think more than half the kids came from out of state that year. And they have not been able to, like, truly, other than Bijan, the out-of-state guys that they've been landing and recruiting, they haven't been able to hit with those guys by and large. And so, it's part of how we end up where we are. The thing that's interesting about what Sarkeesian admitted on Monday is they want to sign 5, right? If they end up signing 4
offensive linemen,
5 offensive linemen. They end up signing 4. We'll know that was one less than they wanted.
It'll be a failure. If they sign 4, it's a failure. I mean, he set the goalpost. That isn't us setting the goalpost, man. He did that. That's a self-inflicted setting of the damn goalpost right there.
Well, because I was about to say, let's say they don't hit on any of the big guys, Banks, who's still committed to Oregon, Dewberry, Campbell. I mean,
Ernest Green put in that mix.
Yeah.
Too.
Let's say they go over
Malik Agbo. They've got options. So.
They do, but they're competing at the highest level of recruiting to land those guys, and they're going to have to beat big dogs to pull it off.
Mm-hmm.
If they let's give them 1. They sign 1, and then they have 3, and they still have to get to 5. But if they had to go and reach down below and take a couple of Max Merrill types, right? 3-star guys that, because it might be that's all that's available if you wait till the very end, there might be slim pickings. It does. I mean, Alex, I think he just said it. Like, if they don't hit, he set the goalpost on Monday. And one of the things that I've been thinking about all week is
5 at the least, he said.
At the least. He said we need them.
He basically said they could go above 5. And I've been thinking 4, maybe 5 all year. He said 5 at the least. I was like, whoa, I wasn't expecting that. So we're talking 5 or 6 maybe.
And and he went out of his way to say the guys that we want, the guys that we would win. I don't remember how exactly he framed it, but it was like champion guys that can help us elevate the program. You have to wait for those guys. We're still recruiting those guys. But if they don't hit those guys, based on his own structuring and framing of what they need to get out of this class, I think we'll all be able to definitively say they failed at the goals they set for themselves. He weirdly, I don't think he meant to, but I think he unintentionally, I mean, maybe everybody knows offensive line is a big need, but it's rare to hear a coach come out before any of the targets have committed, the big ones, and say, we have to have 5. And the reason why we don't have 5 right now is because the 5 we want haven't decided. I don't know. I wonder what that, I can't wait to see how this we're all so close. Jason, just off the top of your head, the first signing date is 6 weeks away. So do you think all these guys are going to make their decisions? When are we expecting decisions to be made?
Devon Campbell has said All-American game. Maybe he makes it before and signs early.
Is that the San Antonio one, or is that a different one?
He's in the Under Armour one.
So was that? Which one's that?
They're both in January. The Under Armour are down in Florida.
Okay.
But yeah, both in January. But a lot of these guys will say that and they'll actually sign early and then they announce at that game. So not out of the question that he could sign early. Dewberry doesn't have a stated timeline. I need to follow up with him and ask him on that. He's never said, okay, I'm going to decide at the bowl game or by this. So I could see him signing early. I think Ernest Green is I think he's at what used to be the Army All-American Bowl, just the All-American Bowl. Malik Agbo is going to he's got 2 more visits this month, and then he's going to decide in December. Who am I leaving out? Touched on 4 of them?
Banks would be the 5th.
Banks, he's a wild card because he's currently committed. So I would assume he would probably decide before the December signing period is what I would guess. But
so one way or the other, let's say half of that 5, 2 or 3 of that 5.
Yes, probably by December.
Yeah. Okay.
What about Neto?
Man, that's a really good question. We haven't talked about him. That dude, nobody knows what that dude's going to do. His coaches, I've talked to people, college coaches don't know. Alex, he could commit tomorrow and it wouldn't shock me, or he could wait till February and none of it would shock me. Don't have a timeline on him. I know Texas is in play there, but
he's the least transparent recruit in the class, right? Like,
probably. Well, he doesn't talk, period.
That's what I mean.
Even when you talk to him, it's like pulling teeth to get to talk to him, and then he doesn't give you anything, and you have to kind of talk to people at his school, but they don't know. I mean, there was a time when USC was believed to be the team to beat. Obviously, with coaching change there, they're kind of out. So, does that open the door for Texas? He might wind up being a part of this class, and it might be the least talked about recruitment of the year if he does. But I just don't have a good read on him, Alex. We had Cole Patterson go by his school. It's been probably a month. We probably need to do that again, but nobody even there seems to know what he's. Now, Texas did offer his younger brother, who's a defensive end. So I'm thinking, okay, that if anything, that would have to help Texas' chances a little. But where does it take it? Did they go from 25 to 45, from 40 to 60? I don't really have a good read on Neto. But yeah, it's a good point to bring him up, Alex.
And while we're talking about 5-star kids, Jason, Evan Stewart to A&M, that one has loomed. We talked about this in the summer because it was like, that kid is, I don't want to say wishy-washy, but he is prone to changing his mind and feeling one way one week and then the next week feeling a different way. Yeah. And A&M never had a massive presence in his recruitment, but they were always kind of looming in the backdrop. And now here we are in November, and it starts to feel like the Evan Stewart may weirdly come down to a Texas versus Texas A&M battle. And I don't know how to handicap that one completely.
Yeah, A&M's never really been a factor for him. Really early A&M was in the picture. He cut them out. It was kind of Texas. Florida was very much in there. Alabama. Florida's fallen off with all the turmoil going on there. And Dan Mullins, is he going to be around? So on and so forth. He didn't visit Florida once when they thought he was going to. Alabama, as of last week, Evan told me last week he is visiting Alabama still. I think it's supposed to be for this weekend. I've heard that visit may or may not happen. I've heard Alabama might be pulling back a little bit. They don't know if they're going to push for Evan Stewart. So, listen, that changes the landscape of this recruitment. Who's it leave? Texas. It leaves Texas A&M, which he took an official visit to, and I haven't seen anywhere that Evans commented publicly, but in talking to A&M people, there's confidence on the A&M side. They think it went really well. I've never heard anybody say A&M's a team to beat, but they think, hey, we are right there in the race all of a sudden. So, if he doesn't go to Alabama, might he wind up? I mean, where else? I mean, LSU is a school.
I think it's Texas and Texas A&M.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of those. I mean, Texas has been a mainstay. Okay, A&M's kind of crept in there because some of these other pieces have fallen off. So I think you're exactly right. It's Texas and Texas A&M. And what Evan's feeling today may be completely different than what he feels tomorrow. As you said, Ketch, he's an unpredictable kid. I talked about him to a Longhorn lunch group the other day, and I said, I still favor Texas just because Texas has been in this thing for so long. He was committed to Texas at one point. Texas has been the consistent in this race. Florida, Alabama, now A&M have been in and out. But A&M got the last chance to make that strong impression, and they did make a very strong impression. So it's about a 50-50 coin flip. It's kind of taking the easy way out, but it really is to me about a 50-50 coin flip. I don't know of those two who I'd put out in front. I mean, Texas has been there forever, but A&M's, that last momentum swing that A&M got with that official visit is a pretty big deal.
Hey, Ketch.
Yeah.
Can I know you guys have moved on, but can I just go back to something real quick? Because I've just been doing a bunch of research. So on the offensive line thing, the last time Texas had at least 5 offensive linemen was in the 2016 class. They also had that. And they also had 6 in 2015. Can I just read off the names from out of 2016 and then read 2015 to you? So 2016 is Gene DeLance.
He's doing really well at Florida, by the way.
You said what?
He's doing really well at Florida, by the way.
Yes, correct. Florida. Tope Amade, Denzel Okafor, JP, is that Euclides? Is that
Euclides? Yeah.
Zach Shackelford and Patrick Hudson. In 2015, it's Patrick Vahe, Ronnie Major, Garrett Thomas, Connor Williams, Tristan Nicholson, and Brandon Hodges.
And 2 of those were transfers.
Yeah. Well, the highest recruited guy of all of those was Patrick Hudson, never played a down of college football. So they only signed 1, and that only happened because of the Baylor situation. I mean, the couple of things stand out there, Anwar. Zach Shackelford might be the best player. Ironically, of all the Zach Shackelford conversations that you and I have had over the years, take Connor Williams out of the equation, and Zach's one of the best guys that Texas signed in that group. And was Zach a 2-star or like a low 3?
I believe he was a low 3. Hold on. He was
committed to Kansas State and
3-star. Yeah. 3-star player.
Okay. But I mean, God, that's not a good group of players. And I would argue not really a good crop of prospects either. I mean, Connor Williams Jason's right. Connor Williams hit, but if you sign 4 Connor Williamses, you're likely only going to hit once unless you are developing offensive linemen at a higher rate than the national average. So the reason why it matters to stack those guys on top of each other is because you want the numbers game to work for you. And in that situation, Anwar, it did not work out for Texas.
Yeah, I just wanted to throw it out. I hear the numbers, but then there's got to be the quality.
How the hell did they sign 11 guys in back-to-back classes and still not fix the offensive line problem?
I believe it's
signed 11 guys who aren't very good. A lot of them aren't very good.
They signed 12 guys actually. Catch six in 15, 6 in 16.
Well, you get the sense that that's what Sarkeesian would probably like to do in each of these next 2 classes. Is
they just throw numbers at it and hope a couple of them hit at some point, man.
Yeah.
Well, at some point you have to make the numbers work for yourself, and in order to do that, they can't be 3-star guys. Because if you sign 5 3-star guys, the math says you probably don't hit on any of them. I mean, you're lucky if one develops into a legit player, but the math says at least 4 out of 5 won't. And in a lot of cases, it'll be 5 out of 5. And that's how you can kind of start spinning your wheels sometimes. Real quick, Jason, before we move on, I want to go back to Iowa State quickly before we go into some parting shots.
We haven't talked about the game very much, have we?
Well, we have a prediction video coming up in a little bit. That may be all the talking of the game.
People don't want to hear about it.
Yeah. Of all the prospects that we've talked to, and there's a big bunch right now, right? You got all the offensive linemen. We talked about Evan Stewart. Who do you think it matters that Texas finishes? I think it matters with all of them that they finish strong. Are there a couple of guys that profile as might not matter more? I'm just trying to figure out, when we watch the game this weekend, what do you think the recruiting stakes are?
Well, if we're talking about them getting momentum, if they can finish 8-4, then they're pretty big. I still think 7-5, as Anwar said, they can still sell a little bit. I mean, 8-4 is better than 7-5, of course. If you ask me which guys, I don't know. Devon Campbell, I think, would be one, because Oklahoma's charging hard on Devon Campbell, and this is an undefeated Oklahoma team. They're competing against Evan Stewart. I think it matters to Evan Stewart. I mean, A&M's not throwing the ball around. Like, Texas can say, "Hey, look what our receivers are doing. Here's a point to their numbers." A&M can't really do that, but A&M can say, "Hey, you want to go to Austin? Yeah, you might catch some balls, but you're going to, especially once you get into the SEC, you're going to be lucky if you go 6-6. We're in the SEC and we're winning this many games." So I think it matters to Evan Stewart. I don't think things are going to implode if Texas loses to Iowa State by any means. I don't think it's going to cost them any of these recruits, but they're kind of at a position with all these players where they're really close recruiting races for all the guys Texas is after. If they want to get Cam Dewberry, Devon Campbell, Evan Stewart, so on and so forth, they got to keep stacking little chips on top of little chips, little wins, and chip away. That, that at some point these wins and losses are going to matter. Is this one game going to turn the tide for Evan Stewart? Probably not, but it sure would help Texas's chances and get a little check in the positive side if Texas can get the win. So I mean, they're all big games at this point. And we said, hell, Ketch, you and I did a podcast a while back, the Oklahoma game. I mean, if Texas could have won that one, I mean, imagine the momentum. So they've pissed away quite a few opportunities. The fuse isn't completely dead yet, but they've got to find a way to just keep, like I said, keep chipping away at some of these guys, find some positive momentum, and stacking some wins together down the stretch would certainly help.
Guys, anybody else have anything before we go into parting shots that we absolutely that we've not talked about? No? We're good? Okay, well then we'll hop into parting shots. Anwar, I believe we were supposed to remind you.
No, I did it last week.
Oh, you did it. That's right. You did the
I called out
thing.
the coach for quitting on the team. So that was kind of like the last week's parting shot. So
just bringing it up, I feel like I killed your vibe. Sorry about that. You're like,
okay.
No. Hey, real quick. Actually, we haven't talked about the Josh Moore thing. What do we think about that? I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but we have a situation where coach player have a conflict severe enough that a locker is emptied.
And the media hears about it.
Media hears about it. Well, and look, to be fair, the guy's a starter. He's a starter at wide receiver. He's actually kind of a key player right now because Casey Kane is his backup. So, we're at a point now at the wide receiver position that if anything happens to Xavier or Joshua Moore,
Casey Kane wouldn't play.
I agree, but I mean, technically on the depth chart, that's the guy who's listed behind him. You've got Kelvonte Dixon, who is probably ahead of him to get more playing time.
Alvonte Woodard would be ahead of him.
Alvonte Woodard, who is a nothing player. I mean, really, at this point. So, I mean, it wasn't an insignificant deal. Like, if Alvonte Woodard gets a dust up with Steve Sarkeesian, that's a nothing story. Mm-hmm. But Joshua Moore is a guy that had fingerprints all over the last game in good ways and bad ways, mostly remembered for the bad ways. I kind of think Sarkeesian needed to cut that dude loose. I feel like Sarkeesian's been a very easygoing guy. And I don't know, there's a part of me, no offense to Joshua Moore and his family or anybody else would be watching this video, but I came away yesterday kind of feeling like, given what's happening in a 3-game losing streak and everything else, that maybe ruling with an iron fist a little bit might be the right message to send. Sarkeesian knows his team in his locker room better than I would. I was I find it curious that he essentially had the same response that Tom Herman had to BJ Foster a year ago, which is clearly you're a good enough player that I'll wiggle around with to keep you on the team. I don't know. Like, I understand it. It's still, I think, an interesting decision given that we know what happened. Anybody want to jump on that grenade?
He plays like every snap, man. Like, he's played 81% or 73% of snaps on the season, but over the course of, he played 96% of snaps this last game. Ever since Jordan Whittington got hurt, he hasn't played any less than 80% of snaps and 85% of snaps in a game. So, it's Xavier, it's 6 and 8 that are out there all the time. And, it's 15 that mixes in. I definitely think it creates an issue for this team. If, even with Joshua Moore's shortcomings, he's a nearly every down player, and they've clearly shown that there aren't even players that they want to substitute in for him, which would lead me to believe it's like, if you lost him, that's a net loss. To your point though, it's like, and here's the other thing. I don't know what was said. I just know what I heard from you guys. There was a heated exchange. Who knows what that is? Tempers can flare up sometimes. So I'll reserve judgment on the, saying he needs to be kicked off the team. I'm just saying from a pure usage standpoint, the way that they've used him, it sure does look like he's a guy that, they feel like they need to count on. 95.38% of snaps in the last game. Only 4 wide receivers even got snaps last game, and Kelvontae Dixon was one of those guys who he only got 2. So you're basically looking at Marcus Washington as your clear number 3 right now, and Kelvontae Dixon's not even being used at this point. He'd probably have to jump into from a 3% role that he's been playing recently, Kelvontae Dixon, to the 55 or 60% role that Marcus Washington's been playing.
Anybody else? Are some players just too big to fail in terms of discipline? Maybe it's not even throwing him off the team. Maybe it's a 1-game suspension. I don't know. I don't know.
We're recording this before Sarkeesian addresses
exactly
on Thursday. So by the time someone sees this, maybe he addresses it. And I'm sure like a lot of these type of things, the coaches probably won't say too much in public. As they want to, keep those things behind the scenes. Because I probably have some more things in the war room this evening on that on Thursday evening, and kind of just a little bit of the inner workings of what's kind of going on behind the scenes. The one thing I can say here comfortably, and I'll be careful with my words, is, I think Sarkeesian is a guy that I put a little bit on the board. That is a guy that came in. He was trying to be like everyone's friend. And I think those are good things. Those are quality things. The hard part that occurs is when you get mid-season and there's losses, and then you want to kind of lay the law down. It's easy for dudes to be like, come on, man. Like that, come on, dude. That ain't you. You ain't that dude. You ain't got that kind of, that smoke within you. So, it's easy to blow it off, especially when the losses are occurring, and especially when there's frustration that's occurring at this point. So I would say that there's some things behind the scene that Sarkeesian was trying to assert himself on, didn't go well. I think Sarkeesian probably, from everything I was told, probably both guys could have handled it a little bit better, because it's a public setting too. I didn't say public, it wasn't in the mall, but it's still around a group of people that can hear it and see it. And people told me like Sarkeesian said some things that, he said some things in the heat of the moment. Josh Moore said some things that in heat in the moment. And I think that's probably the one reason why it's easier for Sarkeesian to backtrack on that, because he can look within himself and say, you know what, probably could have handled this thing a little bit differently. And, and Joshua Moore can probably say, it's like any argument, right? You could get into it. You and I have gotten into it before. And, just sometimes you look at it, it's like, probably could have done that a little bit. Probably could have said that. Probably could have walked away. Things to that effect. So I think that's probably more so what it is. But I would still say that there are some things that, I think all of this ends up being a learning lesson for Sarkeesian in year one, as far as learning about this team, media, all kinds of things. I think it's all learning lessons. It's, as I said before, it's not a finished product. There's some things that he has to learn, that he's learning on the job, and he's still learning. So, we'll see if there's discipline for Joshua Moore going forward. But, catch, if this team is 6-1, everyone's talking about the fiery attitude that these guys have. 7-1 rather. Everyone's fired up and this and that. But it's 4-4, and it just seems like death, doom, and destruction.
It's the first sign, and I think this is to Sark's credit. It's really the first time this season that I've had the thought, oh, these aren't Sark's guys. Sark has done a really good job of absorbing the talent and not saying, I got to get my guys in. And he hasn't thrown the culture under the bus ever. He's not saying I inherited something that was terrible. So we've gone through most of this season, and I don't feel like there's, other than Xavier Worthy, who's a Sark guy, there hasn't been a whole lot of, I think
that's true.
Labeling of players.
Remember that Herman would say stuff like, he'd be like the 7th game of the season. He'd be like, I feel like we've got to about 80% of the guys bought in. It's just like, whoa, yeah, it's just constant progress reports about where he feels like the various allegiances are of the team. It's true. There hasn't been haven't even thought about that.
I haven't either. And literally until yesterday. And I was like, well, guess he needs to get some of his guys back. There's the first time.
Yeah.
I've been like, well, maybe Sark needs to just get some of his guys in. And
it's a good point. Yeah. That's good.
The tardiness and whatever suddenly isn't an issue maybe as much. You win games and you're colorful and you've got character, and you lose them and they will call you a bum. And it's the fine margin that define how we get labels. And this is a team that could be 7-1 and they're 4-4. And here we are. Let's go into parting shots. Let's wrap this bad boy up. Anybody want to lead off?
I'll just lead off by saying I don't really have a parting shot.
I have to have one.
I'll say this one parting shot, just one random thing. I remember this happened to me the other day, going to my kids' jiu-jitsu class, and it's like I'm carrying this big bag with all their clothes and stuff. We got to get them changed before the class, like their belts and their water bottles, like all this stuff. I got 2 kids. We're walking across the thing. Is there anything worse than somebody seeing you from like 20 feet away and holding the door open for you? Because they're being nice. She's like, Jesus, man, I got these kids. Now I got to hurry their asses up. I feel like you're making me feel bad. Now I'm like, come on, kids, come on. Like, we got to get here. This dude's trying to be cool and hold the door open. It's like, man, if people are that far away, they can open the door themselves. I know you're trying to be nice, but
be nice people.
Yeah, stop and like tie your shoes or something and really test how long they want to hold that door. Cause there's nothing worse than, you're right, being rushed sucks.
Yeah, man.
Just let me open my own door at my own pace.
That'll be my parting shot. I remember thinking as that was happening, I'm like, here's a minor annoyance that I can complain about.
Hey, Alex, you know where that doesn't happen? East Coast.
No, yeah, I'll bet, man.
You're just in Texas. That's your problem. People want to hold doors, and you go to New York City. See how long doors get held open for you.
I won't be doing that.
Onward, Jason. I have one ready to go. If you guys,
I got a fun one for you, right?
Okay.
So you guys will appreciate this, Jason. You may know exactly where I'm heading with this when I start to talk about this. But okay, so I've talked about my oldest son and playing basketball and so on and so forth, and so any case, he started going to this academy out in Pflugerville. It's Skyhook Basketball Academy. And I just thought they did training. I didn't realize they had teams. And so I had signed him up to do a tryout for a specific organization in the Austin area on Sunday. And I started asking the people about them. They're like, hey, man, you don't want to go there. They're total money grab, man. I'm like, really? They're like, yeah, money grab. They're just going to get they're going to take your kid. They're going to make them feel like they care about you. And they're going to ask you to do, like sign up for all these different, trainings and this and that. And I was like, oh man, well, thanks for good looking out. And then of course I found out where he's going at Skyhook. They actually have teams. So I'm like, oh, we'll do all that next year. So I didn't show up I didn't have my oldest son show up for the tryout on Sunday that he was supposed to go to, even though he was signed up. And I spent like $10 or something like that. So I didn't really think about it. How about yesterday, to reaffirm what everyone told me, my son got an acceptance letter that said his tryout was successful, but you need to give us money within the next 24 hours to solidify his spot on the team. And so he never showed up.
Maybe they watched this film on Huddle or something. I don't know.
So we would like to congratulate you and your child for being selected to be a part of the blankety blank winter basketball season.
That's bad, dude.
And literally he never showed up, but I have 24 hours to give them my money. So now I'm realizing, as I'm starting to get into this world, there's some shady folks out here who are just about the money grab. I don't know if that's my final shot. It's just my observation that there's some shade out there. I like the people at Skyhook, and we'll see how that goes. But man, that's some BS there.
I have not had to encounter that one. Yeah. At least you caught on.
I had some people in that basketball world are like, "Ooh, don't do that." And now I'm like, "Oh, okay." And then never thought twice about it until I got not only my email, but then a text message letting me know, like, "Hey, it's time that you need to give us that money within 24 hours."
Don't hate the player, hate the game. Mr. Suchomel.
Parting shot is some good news for Texas fans. This morning, Texas picked up a commitment from a 2023 defensive back, Suchomel Johnson, Rivals 250 guy out of Arlington, Seguin. So top national prospect, top, what is he, 176 nationally. Big defensive back, about 6'1", has some length, can play all over the field in their defensive backfield. Texas is telling him, and he wants to play cornerback. So potentially a big cornerback with length that Texas picked up on Thursday morning, just before we started recording this modcast. So not all doom and gloom on the recruiting front. Hasn't been the most exciting couple weeks for Texas in recruiting, but that's a nice pickup. Their first commitment in the 2023 class. They had Ruben Owens committed at one point, of course, but he decommitted. So Suchomel Johnson now officially, technically, is the first commitment for Texas in the 2023 recruiting class.
My parting shot is to simply say, I think as a parent, I enjoyed Halloween more this year than any other year, because I am now, as the father of 7-year-olds, at a point where I realize I'm not that far away from where Jason is, where there will be a expiration date on how long your kids want to be around you and want you to be involved. And so I don't know how much longer I have. Jason, when does it stop?
Well, put it this way. 2 of my girls were at Halloween parties without their family. My son was out walking around with his friends. So we had our 10-year-old with us, and that was it. So I'll give her another year or two, and then she'll probably be going to, well, I think once they hit middle school, they start going to Halloween parties and crap like that. So yeah, and exactly. Enjoy it while you can.
So I really enjoyed it. My kids are sweet. They've got great dispositions. They still love having me around. And it occurred to me, like, I'll be cranky dad to teenagers at some point. And I don't want that, right? I want them to stay 7 forever. So if you've got your kids and you didn't do Halloween with them this year for whatever reason, Jason can tell you, I had my 10 thoughts from the weekend done early this past weekend so that I could be a good dad and get involved. I definitely don't take those things for granted. And now I'm officially at a stage where I'm on a weird little countdown. It's never really crossed my mind that there's an expiration date on the milk carton until this year. I can't read the expiration date, but I know it's coming. And until it does, I'm really going to enjoy that. My kids actually like me. Like, they love me. They love, Dad, I got a Twix. Like, it was incredibly fulfilling to be able to enjoy that level of happiness when we all know there will be an age at some point where a Twix miniature won't excite any of them. And I don't know what the hell I'll do when that happens. But if you like the video, anything that we've said, give us a like, subscribe to the channel, get notifications, comment in the section, do all of those things that we tell you with every single video. But for myself, Anwar, Jason, and Alex, we appreciate you for hanging in this long, watching the video. We'll do it again next week. You guys take care of each other. Later.